Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cellular Healing TV. I'm Ashley Smith, and today we welcome special guest Dr. Titus Chiu. We have a really important topic for you today. Dr. Pompa and Dr. Chiu will be talking all about brain health. We'll learn how to utilize a root cause approach to heal your brain after a concussion, how it's possible to get well and stay well after a traumatic brain injury, and we'll hear simple ways to gather information at home about the wellness of your brain, as well as some easy brain exercises you can utilize at home. This is an episode you won't want to miss. But before we get started, let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Chiu. Dr. Titus Chiu is a best-selling author, award-winning international speaker, and functional neurologist who is on a mission to transform the face of healthcare for the 1.1 billion people around the world struggling with brain and mental disorders. He is the co-founder and clinical director of COBA Family Wellness, a functional medicine center located in Berkeley, California, that specializes in post-concussion syndrome and other neurological conditions. Dr. Chiu is the #1 best-selling author of Brain Save, the 6-week plan to heal your brain from concussions, brain injuries, and trauma that was just released on Amazon. So let's welcome Dr. Pompa and Dr. Chiu and get right into it. This is Cellular Healing TV.
Well, welcome, Dr. Titus. I appreciate you coming on. What a big topic. 1.1 billion people around the world with brain disorders, all types of neurodegenerative conditions we've talked about on this show. But that's a big number. And this has been a passion and a mission of yours to bring some of the things that you're doing to the world and even enlighten people about this growing problem. And, you know, I live here in Park City, Utah. So we have major concussion programs, brain injury programs here, because with skiing, snowboarding, you know, this is a massive reality, and thank God a growing reality. Tora Bright was one of my clients, and I don't know if you know who she is, but she's a famous double gold medalist snowboarder. She was on Dancing with Stars. That's why most people know her. And she's a sweetheart. She came to me with 7 concussions. I mean, imagine, right? Wow. And obviously she was taken out of the sport. And with a lot of the work that I'm passionate about, I got her back in the sport. Unfortunately, she got 2 more concussions. So maybe that wasn't a good thing. But look, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I've seen this personally. My daughter had 2 concussions. I'm seeing, you know, because I'm around skiing here, you know, I'm seeing a lot more of this problem. But this goes even beyond that. Brain trauma. You've written a #1 bestseller, which actually we should promote. I should have. It's called Brain Save, and we should make sure people can find that on Amazon. But how did you get into this, Doc? Honestly, because not many people are just focusing on this like you are.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Dr. Dan, and it really is my mission to help transform the face of healthcare for the millions of people suffering with post-concussion syndrome. And the way I got into it is actually a pretty interesting story, because I never set out to be a post-concussion syndrome specialist. I actually, years ago, I was living overseas and I was hit by a car on my way to work. I was on a scooter and I got smashed by a car, flew through the air, like landed, broke my ribs, dislocated my shoulder. And thank God I was actually wearing a helmet, or I really wouldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't be here today. So through that, though, I ended up, you know, they brought me to the emergency room and they did all the tests. Everything was quote unquote normal, but I ended up with chronic neck and shoulder pain. And so I tried everything in conventional medicine. I tried physical therapy, painkillers, you name it, rest, and nothing worked. And it was just so frustrating, and I was giving up hope. Thank God at the time, though, my brother, he was a chiropractor. And so I went home one winter vacation, and within 3 sessions, he treated me, and that neck and shoulder pain was like gone. And so I was blown away, and I wanted to learn, okay, how did he do that? What is this stuff, this magical stuff, and how can I do that for other people? And so I finished up my job and I came back to the United States and I just started school. I dove deep into the natural medicine and chiropractic and all of that. And along the way, I actually discovered neurology, and I really fell in love with the model of neurology because there's a great way for me to understand the why. why do people have the symptoms that they do, and why aren't they getting better if they're doing the normal treatments? And so through that, I dove deep into that, really learned it as much as I could. And I actually started teaching for a neurology institute. So I was flown all over the world to teach neurology to doctors after I graduated. And so I would get a lot of referrals from other doctors, as well as a lot of patients, that I would care for. At that time, though, I wasn't even really specializing, like I said, in concussion, but I was seeing a lot of patients with more chronic issues, chronic neurological symptoms, or even things like autoimmunity. And when I would do the normal protocols that I learned in school or that I learned in seminars, it would help a lot of people, right? But then there was a certain population of patients, not a huge one, but significant enough that when I would do the normal protocols like dietary changes, maybe some basic manual therapy, acupuncture, things like that, when I do those things, they wouldn't get better. And so again, I'm just wondering to myself, why, scratching my head, why aren't they getting better? So I do a deeper analysis into their history, and guess what? They all had a history of a concussion, and not like a massive concussion where necessarily they were blacked out, like they got in a huge car accident and they woke up in the emergency room. No, even simple things like, yeah, if they played sports when they're younger, maybe, heading the ball like a soccer ball multiple times, never getting knocked out, but enough to kind of shake and jar their brain. And so I found this pattern. A lot of people with these chronic symptoms like brain fog and memory issues or chronic fatigue, or even things like autoimmunity, they had this root cause in the head injury. Oh. So from there, I just dove deeper. That's just my personality. It's like,
yeah, me too.
Well, yeah, I know. That's why I really love your stuff too. It's just about learning. I'm an eternal student. I'm also very passionate about teaching, but it all comes from my, thirst for knowledge. And I really see that in your work too, and I admire it. And so I always want to understand why, okay, why are they not, healing? And so I did this root cause analysis, and wow, a lot of them had this history of a concussion or multiple concussions. And so then I'm like, okay, what do I need to do to dive into that world? And so I went to, seminars and conferences, and I read research article, I cracked open books, and I started to learn more and more about this really just kind of underneath the surface, this world of concussions, and how I firmly believe it's a silent epidemic, because the brain controls everything. I really love your cellular detox work, and just like you, I think you have rooted in chiropractic, right? Which is all about changing the nervous system. And that's the thing, it's the brain controls everything. It controls every single cell in your body. And so even patients who didn't have quote unquote classical neurological symptoms, but they might have had fatigue or autoimmunity or Hashimoto's, I found a lot of them that weren't responding to the typical protocols had a history of concussion. And so after I learned all that stuff and I started applying it to their lives, that's when they started getting better. And so I'm like, wow, this is a huge, it's an epidemic that really needs care. And that's actually one of the main reasons why I wrote my book, is because so many people out there, number one, who suffer from these chronic, neurological symptoms or other types of chronic symptoms, they don't get the care they need as you. And I know that's part of your mission, is education. And so that's why I wrote this book, number one, to educate other doctors too. The other doctors out there, even though they might not specialize in neurology or concussions, I think for a lot of their patients that aren't responding to their protocols, it could be because they have this neurological root cause because of the concussion. So that's one reason why I wrote the book. Number two, I wrote the book not as a technical piece to dive deep and impress people with my knowledge of neurology or science. It's really a straightforward, practical book for a person who's had a concussion and is still struggling with symptoms months or years after. And so it's really, the way I wrote it is really conversational, because I actually have a history of multiple concussions. And so I write it from this perspective, almost like, hey, you know, like if you're a good friend of mine who's had a concussion, I'm like, man, here's some things that you can do immediately, you know, and to
Yeah.
give people hope, because a lot of patients who've had concussions and they've been to doctor after doctor, they're frustrated because the doctors either they don't know what to do and they give them some generic advice like, oh, get some rest or take some aspirin. Or I've seen this a lot with my patients, and it really breaks my heart. They get written off like they're crazy.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the main reasons why I wrote the book, is because you're not crazy. It's actually a physical, neurological problem rooted in the neural networks of your brain, of your nervous system.
Well, let's peel this back a little bit. The book's Brain Safe. I'm sure you can get it on Amazon, but I'm sure we'll give your website here at one point as well, or I'm sure they can get it there. You have a 6-week program in the book that we're going to get to and we're going to talk about, because I can't wait for my viewers to hear this. But I want to pull back a little bit, because we said 1.1 billion head mental disorders. So you're connecting head trauma to many mental disorders, right? And I would say many brain problems. I mean, you even said, brain fog, which many of our viewers and listeners suffer from brain fog, anxiety, sleep problems, hormone dysregulation. I mean, you're connecting this to many of these different conditions. And I can tell you personally, I see a perfect storm. I see people who get a trauma, and it's the thing that sets them over the edge, because they already have multiple stressors going on. Exactly. So, talk about this connection a little bit more, and perhaps maybe what happens after a brain trauma that could lead to these things.
Yeah, so the major connection, like I said, between brain traumas and any number of chronic symptoms is the fact, number one, it's several things actually, but number one, the brain controls every single cell in your body. But very specifically, number two, the brain controls and regulates the digestive system,
right?
What we call the brain-gut axis. There's a very specific neurological pathway from areas within the brain, the cortex, with what we call the brainstem, which sits in between your brain and your spinal cord. And within your brainstem, you have this region called the nucleus tractus solitarius, as well as other different types of nuclei, also what we call the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus nerve. I'm sure you're aware of the vagus nerve and how powerful, not only does it control digestive function, but also heart rate, and cardiovascular function, reproductive function, all the life-giving essential functions. So the brain controls the vagus nerve, which then can control the gut. And as you know, with this functional medicine model, a lot of people are starting to understand the gut is kind of like the key. It's like the gateway to health. And so if there's imbalances in your digestive system, that could lead to chronic fatigue, that could lead to autoimmunity, that could lead to a whole host of different symptoms. Well, the thing is, the research has shown if someone suffers a traumatic brain injury, like even if their digestive system is totally fine, like they have a good balance of good bacteria, they have healthy gut motility and movement, they don't have constipation or bloating, immediately after traumatic brain injury, they can trigger what's known as leaky gut.
Yeah.
Leaky gut opens the doors to a host of a million different like degenerative health conditions.
Yes.
So that's one of the root causes for what I find for a lot of people who've tried just dietary interventions, supplement interventions, and lifestyle, and even running functional medicine tests, looking at blood, looking at stool, looking at urine, to look at all the different systems. And when they do those protocols, if they don't get better, and especially if they have a history of a concussion, sometimes it's the concussion that's the root cause.
Yeah. I want to say something there, because I'm finding that, of course, I'm lecturing everywhere, and right now there is no doubt an excitement about the microbiome and its relationship to the brain, right? I mean, matter of fact, we've been working on a product for 4 years. It's a bacteria these bacteria affect the way the brain is. It's called neurobiotic. So we get that access. However, with that said, I feel like what's being forgotten is what you're saying, meaning that oftentimes, I can talk clinically about this, is that until we get the brain here fixed, we can't fix the gut. So
Exactly.
we're almost forgetting about the other way around. And of course, you brought up the point that, it affects the vagus nerve affects the gut, and it's even more complicated than that. So, so what you're saying is we have to pay attention to this brain and this brain because there's an interrelationship with both.
Exactly. Yeah. And what you're talking about, we call the gut-brain axis, as you know. It's like the intimate relationship between the gut and the brain. And everyone calls the gut the second brain, the enteric nervous system. And why I'm so excited about that already is just revolutionary, right? Looking at how the gut influences the nervous system as well as the endocrine system, all the different systems of the body. And there's so many exciting avenues of therapy through that understanding, right? Now, exactly what I'm talking about, it's not a one-way street. That not only influences the brain, but just as importantly, the nervous system has these very specific pathways that control gut function.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and so that's the thing. I find that a lot of times that's the missing link because treatments, if it's a gut-brain issue, like diet, supplements, lifestyle can totally handle that, right? And running lab tests and medications if necessary. But when it comes to the brain's unique. And not only does it respond to like nutrition in the form of food and supplements and things like that and probiotics, it also responds to activation, meaning like exercise. We can actually use specific sensory modalities like sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch to target specific neurological pathways. So for example, if someone's had a head injury and they're starting to suffer from like, lack of concentration or poor focus or just feeling kind of brain foggy, many times it's because their prefrontal lobe has been damaged. Because the prefrontal lobe is very important for helping us focus. But in addition, the prefrontal lobe is very important for helping us control and coordinate our movements. And so if someone has a concussion, I see this all the time. They're like, oh yeah, I have brain fog. I have all these cognitive symptoms. I've been to the doctor. They ran their MRIs, their CT scans, and everything's normal, all right? But then when I see them and I do a neurological evaluation, I might find that when they move their fingers quickly on one side versus the other, one side slower than the other. And the reason why that's really important, because that's not only a window into how well they move their fingers, it's a window into the prefrontal lobe.
Right.
And with that information, I just love it because they just have this sense of relief. They're just like, oh my God, I feel so validated because I've been to doctor after doctor and everyone says, oh, it's, there's nothing wrong, just rest, or it's all in your head, you're crazy. You should see a psychiatrist or take these, psychotropic medications. And I find that so sad.
Yeah.
But the point of all this is once I figure out, okay, hey, they have a problem with let's say their right prefrontal cortex, which deals with maybe like emotional regulation as well as, organizing their thoughts. Then what I can do, in addition to, giving nutrients that feed the brain like fish oils and probiotics and things of that nature, I can also give them very specific brain-based therapies to actually target the right frontal lobe over the left because specificity is so important. So for example, for someone who has got an issue with their right prefrontal lobe, and the way they might know that is if they have like problems with focus and concentration and maybe controlling their emotions, what I can do is very specific movement therapies on the left side of their body, which targets the right prefrontal lobe. Or I could give them very specific eye exercises that triggers these neural pathways, literally creating what's known as neuroplasticity, where you can actually strengthen the neurons in the right prefrontal lobe. So that's the thing. It's like when it comes to the brain is unique, and not only it needs nutrition, it also needs specific activation.
So let's back up, because I know you have 5 ways to heal a brain after a concussion, and you're probably dialing into that a little bit. You have a 6-week program in your book.
I got a little bit excited. I jumped ahead.
I know, but I get excited about it too, because I get this. I mean, you and I are completely on the same basis. I mean, we're forgetting about, the brain, as controlling everything in the body. And I have gotten amazing results. What I have noted is when people get concussions, a lot of the neurotoxic patients that have inorganic mercury in the brain, it jars it forward. It literally drives it deeper. And there's studies showing that, yeah, because it breaks down when you hit your head. The inflammation breaks down other barriers, other protective measures, and then we have a complicating issue. So I know clinically, I've seen that that's part of it. Okay, I know my viewers and listeners are wanting to know this. Okay, so I've hit my head a few times. There's that saying, right?
Yeah.
I can remember skiing once where I hit the back of my head and I wasn't right for a week, right? So how do we know? What kind of tests can we do right now, even like you did the finger thing, right? What other things can we test right now to see, could this be a problem? Or do I have to go to a clinic specifically?
Yeah, so first off, if someone's had a head injury and they're concerned, I think the first thing they should do is go to the emergency room and get checked.
Of course.
Yeah, because you want to make sure that there's no bleeds, there's no emergency situations, which conventional medicine excels at. But when it comes to the more chronic degenerative symptom or neurological conditions like post-concussion syndrome or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, really the standard of care is just not good enough. So some things that you can do, if the viewers out there have had head injuries and even ones that you haven't blacked out, after you make sure that there's nothing life-threatening, going on, simple test of your own balance. So for example, if you just stand up, if any viewers are sitting, you just stand up, and if you put your feet close together, right, you might find that already doing that, you might feel a little unsteady, right? Especially if you've had a head injury, you might feel a little unsteady, but some of you might not. So the next thing you can do, and if you're watching out there, make sure that you have the ability to, if you start losing your balance, just open your eyes so you don't fall over, okay? We don't want anyone getting injured. So the next thing you can do after putting your feet together is just try doing that and then closing your eyes.
Yeah.
And so if you close your eyes, some of you, you might find that all of a sudden, whoa, I feel a little unsteady now.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When that happens, then we know, okay, there's three major systems in your nervous system that control balance. It's vision, it's what we call the inner ear, and then it's all the muscles. They send information to your brain telling you, okay, right now I'm standing here and I'm getting this information, so I'm not feeling unsteady. Right. But if you remove vision by closing your eyes, if there's an imbalance in your inner ear, or if there's an imbalance in your muscle signals, that means that and you start to wobble, that one of those systems, it's a bit off. And it's functional. It's not like you can't walk around the world, and you're like falling over. But you might find that a lot of patients who I worked with concussion, they just say, yeah, something's just not off. Like I just feel like sometimes I'm either like floating or I just don't feel very grounded. Usually that's because of the inner ear or the muscles. This is a great objective test to find out that maybe something's a little bit out of balance that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, when I close it and do one foot and then close my eyes, it's harder. Can you take it?
I can see that. Yeah, exactly. I can see you're a little bit more unsteady.
Yeah, that's one foot.
You can do. I'm glad you brought that up, because let's say, the viewers out there, if they tried that, put their feet together, close their eyes, and they still feel pretty balanced, maybe a little off, you could then try it with your one foot versus the other. Yeah. Because we can actually then, for example, if you're balancing on your right foot and it's harder than your left, that's a clue that maybe what we call the cerebellum on your right side, or the parietal lobe or frontal lobe on the left, there's some imbalance there. And that's very subtle, but that's the thing, Dr. Dan, like many times that's the key that cracks the case for my patients with concussions. It's these subtleties that, because a lot of times they're not like incapacitated where they can't get out of bed, but they might feel dizzy when they're driving in a car, or when they're in a grocery store walking down the aisle, they might feel overwhelmed, or light and sounds are just a little bit too much. It's these subtleties because there's subtle imbalances in what I call the neural networks, the different brain regions that allow for us to balance, to focus, to not be irritated by light or sound.
Yeah, well, you said light. That was one of my questions. What about, light sensitivity, sound sensitivity? Those are symptoms that I see in neurotoxic people in general. Yeah. Light sensitivity, even chemical sensitivities. Is that made worse by the brain being out of balance?
Absolutely. And very specifically, there's key neural networks that create that lighter sound sensitivity. One of them is what we call the mesencephalon. I talked about the brainstem earlier. The brainstem is just this really important part of your nervous system between your brain and your spinal cord that controls vital functions like we talked about, like heart rate, digestive function, reproduction, like all that stuff. Well, at the top of the brainstem, it's this area we call the midbrain. It's the top of the brainstem. That controls what we call the ascending reticular activating system. That allows us to have arousal. But one of the ways we get arousal is through what? Light and sound. So if the midbrain is out of balance, and many times people with, like you said, neurotoxicity, or what I call immunoexcitotoxicity, which was happens in a concussion, that area becomes overactive. And so any little light coming in, any little sound coming in just arouses the person too much, and they just feel overwhelmed or irritable or sometimes even angry, I find. And that's the thing. Another test that people can do to see if their mesencephalon's out of balance is if they take like a light, maybe a light from their phone or a flashlight, and if they shine it in their eye, from the right hand field of view versus the left, you might find that one side you might feel a little more irritated or a little more like light sensitive than the other, or maybe both sides, meaning that both sides of your brainstem is just overactive. So that's a really good objective way to see, maybe I need to do things to calm down my brainstem, and in doing so, it can help with the light and sound sensitivity. And I really like the fact that you brought that up, Dr. Dan, about a lot of patients you see with neurotoxicity, they get the light and sound sensitivity. Well, guess what? The mesencephalon, that top part of your brainstem, it actually has receptors for inflammatory molecules, what we call interleukin-6. Interleukin-6 is a pro-inflammatory cytokine. It's a messenger that causes inflammation in the body and in the brain. And the midbrain, the mesencephalon, actually has a huge density of receptors for them, meaning, let's say, for example, someone has a gut imbalance, right? Maybe they have constipation or they have some type of gut infection. That can cause inflammation not only in their body, but that can also cause inflammation in their brain.
Right.
So if those chemicals from the gut, the interleukin-6, goes to the brainstem in the mesencephalon, that neurotoxicity from the gut can lead to, guess what? Light and sound sensitivity. And so when I work with patients, we do things to help lower inflammation. Many of the similar things you do, detoxification, supplements, running lab tests to identify other root causes of inflammation. But at the same time, physical things you can do to help calm an overactive mesencephalon or brainstem is to plug your ears or to wear sunglasses. Because like I said, the midbrain, it processes lights and sounds, right? So one way to calm an overactive mesencephalon is to either wear sunglasses or to plug your ears. A lot of times there'll be a side of this. And so that's why I said, you listeners out there, you might want to shine a light from the right side versus the left and see if one of them creates a little bit more, irritation or light sensitivity, one side versus the other. And let's say if it's the right field of view, what you can do is you can wear sunglasses, but in addition, you can take like an earplug and plug your right ear.
Oh, wow.
Because that'll help calm down that overactive mesencephalon. So that was what I was saying earlier. The brain and the nervous system is unique. Not only does it respond to things like fish oils, probiotics, all those wonderful things, it also responds to your senses. And so if you have an area that's too active, all you need to do is calm it down, right? And if you have an area that's underactive, you need to do things to activate and stimulate it.
All right, well, let's peel back your 6-week program. And I know within it, you do, 5 things you can do to heal your brain after trauma. So let's give our viewers and listeners some, real concrete things here, So what does that look like? Okay, great. Some of you doing the test right now, watching this and going, I can't even stand on 2 feet closed, let alone 1 foot, right?
Yeah.
If I close my eyes, forget it. And that light thing, that really irritates me. Okay, so they're identifying that they have a problem. Now what?
Sure. So in my book, I actually walk people through an entire 6-week program. And it's cool because in my book, I even talk about before that, like making it personalized, because more important, as you know, Dr. Dan, than the treatment is identifying the root cause,
Yeah,
right? And
absolutely.
so in my book, I talk about the root cause of post-concussion syndrome, and it's what I call these imbalances in the different neural networks that make up your nervous system. And so one of the top neural networks that gets injured in a concussion is, we already talked about, the prefrontal lobe. But check it out, in my book, I actually have a little quiz where a person, you know, if they have a head injury, they can be like, huh, do I suffer from brain fog? If I do, is it mild, moderate, or severe? And you can actually grade it. And then you figure out, oh, wow, at the end of it, I have a score of like 50. That means, wow, there's an issue in my prefrontal lobe. So I'll need to do something about that, right? And so that's in part 1 of the book. And then part 3 of the book is the actual 6-week plan. So let's say you found that you had issues with the prefrontal lobe. There's a very specific exercise in my book that you can do to exercise your prefrontal lobe. And that's actually a meditation procedure, a meditation that from Kundalini Yoga. So let's say, for example, you do the quiz, you have brain fog, you have issues with concentration, you might have issues organizing your thoughts or controlling your emotions. That's a big kind of a yellow red flag that you have an issue in the neural network made up of your prefrontal lobe. So one thing you can do is this meditation where you just go like this with your fingers. So with your thumb and index finger, you do 1, and then you do 2, and you do 3, and 4, just like in that order. So index, middle, ring, pinky, okay? And so you just do that. But then what you want to do, you want to add these words, sa, ta, na, ma. And you coordinate the index with sa. And then when you say ta, you do the middle finger. And when you say sa, ta, na, the ring finger, and ma for the pinky. So sa, ta, na, ma. Sa, ta, na, ma. And you can do that seated. I like to do that walking, actually, while I'm listening to music, so I can get a lot of blood flow and oxygen to my brain. And so the cool thing,
What's the point of you're stimulating one part of the brain by making it do a verbal connection, and then you're stimulating the other frontal cortex by making it do an actual exercise. Okay.
You got it. So when you speak, what allows you to actually express language is this area we call Broca's area in your frontal lobe. And then when you do fine movements with your fingers, guess what area lights up as well? The frontal lobe as well. So when we do these two together, we're really powerfully activating the prefrontal cortex. So sa, ta, na, ma, sa, ta, na, ma. And so I recommend people, if you have a lot of, like a lot of high scores, in your prefrontal lobe, that means like there's probably a real big issue there. I don't recommend people doing that for too long, because although it seems very like small, it is a very powerful way of activating the prefrontal lobe. There's an actual a research study, I actually reference it in my book, where they look at people doing this and literally lighting up the frontal lobe. So it's a very powerful thing. And a lot of the exercises that I talk about in my book, they might seem trivial, but if your brain is already neurotoxic from your concussion and there's a lot of inflammation, many times less is more. And in my book, I also talk about this really important concept of, guess what? Slowing down.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think even for the viewers out there who haven't had concussions, this one tip that I talk about in my book, which I call mini breaks, can literally transform your life. I know for me, and I would imagine maybe we sometimes get really focused, we get really excited about our projects and making an impact in the world. I could sit down and just work for 8-10 hours straight, not after I had my head injury. I had to do a lot to heal my own brain, right? But now I could sit down for hours without even taking a break. But that's not good, right? It's because we all go through these cycles, which we call ultradian rhythms, where we have a lot of energy. If our brains are healthy, we have a lot of energy for about 90 minutes. When it comes to about 2 hours, we start to go down, right? We start to go down in terms of our energy levels, our brain capacity. But many of us, myself included, before I started doing this practice, I would blaze through that, 30 minutes where I actually needed to step back from whatever I was doing and take a mini break. And we all can do that, but it's at the expense of creating more toxicity in our brains, because we drive what's known as the fight or flight response. We release cortisol, adrenaline, all those things, right? So in addition, another thing that people can do who've had head injuries, or even people who haven't, but kind of can relate to what I'm saying, is like getting really focused on something and not taking a break, or what I call mini breaks. And it's the point of that is to really unplug and kind of clear the synaptic clutter that's collected between your brain cells within that 90 minutes of focused attention. And so for every 90 minutes, what I encourage you guys to do first is, if you haven't done this before, actually, if you're sitting down at your desk to start working or focusing on something, set your alarm for 90 minutes. And when it goes off, finish that sentence you're writing or reading, or if you're having a conversation with someone, just kind of wrap that up and just step away from that. And like the point of these mini breaks is it can't involve any type of focused attention. So it could be something as simple as, like, what I do a lot is just close my eyes and rub my eyeballs, because that can actually trigger the parasympathetic nervous system to calm the fight or flight sympathetic, right? So I just close my eyes, and you'll see a lot of kids doing that. And sometimes when I get really tired, I'll just I'll catch myself rubbing my eyeballs. Yeah, it's because I need that mini break. My brain's, it's oversaturated. Yeah, but what it actually does, it triggers a neurological reflex that calms the fight or flight response down.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, though. Innate intelligence makes us do that anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
When I've been doing stuff for a while, I automatically start doing that. It's incredible.
Yeah, beautiful. And that's the thing, Dr. Dan, that's the key, is it's about awareness. And so after a while, if you set it in your clock for 90 minutes, you're going to start becoming aware. I don't set it in my clock anymore, but I might find that if I'm in a conversation, and even though it's an interesting conversation, I start getting a little distracted, that means it's time for me to have a mini break.
Yeah,
I might excuse myself, be like, hey, I just need a second, I'm gonna stretch. Or people out there, they might find if they're like focusing on something and they start getting fidgety, just stretching a little bit, or just stretching their arms and yawning, that's their brain. That's your brain telling you, okay, it's time for a mini break. And believe it or not, that's one of the most powerful things I've shared with my patients who've had head injuries. Not even patients with head injuries, but more like neurological symptoms. That's been a lifesaver.
What about ADD? What's the opposite, right? Where people are like, are you kidding me? 90 minutes? I can't focus for 10. I mean, I have a lot of neurotoxic, lead patients here in the house.
Yeah.
We won't mention any names. That, they can't, like, I have to break myself up like you. I can focus for hours at a time.
Yeah.
Purposely have to, break it up. But them, it's 10 minute, 5 minute, 1 minute. What about that? Is there anything we can do for them?
Yeah, no, but it's the same concept, Dr. Dan. So when I said 90 minutes, I meant for people who have had it, who haven't had concussions or have healed from their concussions like I have. But a lot of my patients with, head injuries, or patients who have neural inflammation, they might only be able to go for 5-10 minutes without, so what they need to do is also honor that. So, for example, I find a lot of my patients who've had head injuries, they get frustrated because they might have been able to focus for hours on end, but all of a sudden they go 5 minutes and they have a headache, right? So the key, again, is just self-awareness, number one, becoming aware of that. When is that sweet spot for you? Is it 90 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? Number two, just honoring that. So if you've had a head injury and you can't focus as very long anymore, that's okay, because your brain is inflamed and it's really difficult. It makes sense that you can't.
All right.
So exactly. But for people who have never been able to do that, The other thing is what would be really helpful for them is actually doing the frontal lobe finger tap, because that trains the frontal lobe
Right.
actually start allowing them to have better focus and attention. And it's really fascinating. I'm going to geek out just for a second here. There's two key neural networks that are involved in what I'm talking about. One is called the central executive network. That allows us to really have great focus and concentration. And people with ADD or ADHD, guess what? Those neural networks are a bit weak. Okay. So what they need are exercises and therapies to strengthen those. And the central executive network it's actually one major hub is the prefrontal cortex. So exercises like the Satanama meditation worked fantastic for people with issues with like ADD or inattention, things like that.
Let's get my wife in here. We're going to do some Satanama. Anyway.
Yeah. And then the other neural network, which is really important that I'm talking about here, is called the default mode network. And that's kind of like the standby mode of our brains. In the past, scientists used to think when we'd space out or not do anything that required a lot of focus, our brains would just shut off. That couldn't be further from the truth. What actually happens, the central executive network that's tied up with the frontal lobe, that shuts off. But guess what? The default mode network powers up. And it's beautiful, though. The default mode network is the neural network that's related to healing, integration, to creativity and insight. So you might find that a lot of people with quote unquote ADD, their gift is to be able to see the bigger picture, tie in all these different things related to like insight and creativity. And so what I find, it's all about balance.
Yeah, it's true.
I'm really good at the central executive network, focusing in. And I used to try to, like, if I had a problem or I was trying to be creative or come up with a solution, I thought, oh, the more I, worked at it harder and harder, I finally get that insight.
Yeah.
But Isaac Newton, when did he discover, the law of gravity or whatever?
Yeah.
It was when he was chilling out under the tree and the apple fell on his head, right? Is because the default mode network was activating, allowed all the energy put in, all the ideas that was percolating to start to come together and integrate.
It's so true. And I often notice when I'm doing something that slightly distracts my conscious mind, meaning like driving, showering.
Exactly.
Things start firing, because I'm being slightly distracted, visual when you're driving, of course, a lot of visual stuff, showering, just physical touch. It's like, and then boom, ideas come, right? It's like
they start to come in. Yeah, it's because your default mode network related more to the right hemisphere of the brain starts to come to life, and it's just magic. And it's so important, again, not only for creativity but for healing. And that's what I'm talking about. People who might have had really good ability to focus and concentrate before their head injury or before some neurotoxic event, they might not be able to do that as much because they're still trying to tax their, attention networks. But what they actually need to do is allow their default mode network, the healing network, to start to come to life more. And the way to do that, again, is to start becoming aware of the need for mini breaks. Is it every 90 minutes that you start to get a little kind of like brain foggy, or is it every 15 minutes? And when you start to become aware of that, you need to honor that. Just step back. Exactly. Close your eyes, rub them, stretch.
Yeah.
Take a break. And if you have the luxury, take a nap. When I've started to chunk out days outside of patients when I'm writing or, working on videos and educational materials, where I'll literally allow myself, if I've done really, worked really hard, I'll find like a nice patch of grass if it's nice out, lie down in that patch of grass, close my eyes, and do this yoga pose where I just let everything go and let my mind wander. So a lot of times if I'm like in this, if I have a lot of ideas that I'm trying to capture and I don't want to lose them, that's the attention network going. So the point is, even if you're lying down or you're closing your eyes, if you have a lot of great ideas, don't try to hold on to any of them. Because the more you do that, the more the attention networks become tired, right? And then you actually become less productive, you less creative. So it's like One other way to allow the default mode network, besides these mini breaks, like closing your eyes and rubbing them, is in those times, let your mind wander. So if you're just kind of like done and you're tired, you're yawny, you're fidgety, just sit there and just let your mind wander. Look out the window. If ideas come to your head, just let them come in, and just like if they're a cloud passing by, let them pass by. Because then you allow the healing, you allow the integration and the insight to happen.
Wow. Yeah, it's fun hearing you, speak about this, because you understand the neurology so well, and have obviously
I'm a neurology nerd. Like,
yeah, exactly, which is so cool. All right, give us more. I mean, there's a 6-week program. There's obviously 5 things to do after a concussion. You're hitting on some of them. Keep going. What next?
Absolutely. So, just to kind of recap, there's things that are very important to exercise your brain and to rebuild the neural networks that might have been injured. Number one. Number two, so like the satanama, there's things that you can do to help healing and integration and wholeness happen. And that's by slowing down and doing something like taking a brain save mini break. Number three, there's things that you can do in terms of what we kind of talked about before, lower any type of inflammation or what we call excitotoxicity, like
this is where my brain detox would come in, because you can't stop the inflammation if you don't remove the toxins.
Absolutely. That is
detoxing correctly, especially when it comes to the brain. And honestly, we have thousands of people watching this right now who got their lives back by getting rid of the neurotoxins in the brain correctly.
The programs through the cellular detox, that is essential, because what I'm talking about, like building neural networks and doing these exercises, if we're doing that and the systems, if their person's brain is inflamed or toxic, it's like we're building bridges, but nighttime, they get burned down.
Yeah, you know what? This excites me, because this needs to be done while they're doing brain detox, right? I mean, it's like, you put these two things together, because you still have to, fire and rewire, it's like, so we can get rid of the toxins, but if we don't rewire the bridges, we still need to make new bridges. So that's what we're talking about. We have to, fire and rewire. So
yeah, so both are so essential to brain healing.
Yeah.
You like to use the analogy. It's like I'm doing personal training for a person's brain. So for example, if the viewers out there, they had a goal of wanting to lose weight, they might go to a personal trainer who understands exercise and also understands nutrition, right? And if the personal trainer gives them a diet and supplements to lower inflammation, guess what? They'll probably lose weight, right? But are they going to build muscles just by changing their diet?
Right.
No, you actually have to do the exercise. You have to do push-ups and pull-ups and squats, right? Same thing with the brain. That's what I was talking about. The brain is unique in that not only do we need to do things to lower inflammation and toxins, we actually do need to do things that actually target neural networks through therapies and or exercises. But like you said, Dr. Dan, if a person's inflamed, if they're toxic, and we're trying to build these with exercises, you're going to build that, but then overnight it's going to burn down.
Yeah.
So another really important thing to do as you're going through the 6-week plan to heal your brain, I talk about in my book, more specifics, is lower neural inflammation. And we can do that through diet and supplements. So as all the viewers know out there, very important nutrient for brain health to help actually grow the connections, but also lower neuroinflammation, is what we call docosahexaenoic acid. And that's DHA, which is found in very high levels in fish oils. And so unfortunately, though, a lot of the world's sources of fish, not only are they doing...
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm more of a fan of fish than fish oil, and there's a lot of reasons for that we won't discuss. But
exactly. But yeah, it's very saddening. But yeah, the good news is there's things we can do. There's high quality supplements out there that really the companies pay attention to purity, quality, and safety. So if you can't find a really good source of clean fish, my next recommendation is, upping your dosage of fish oils, more specifically docosahexaenoic acid. And there's vegan sources out there, things like algae and whatnot as well, that viewers can use.
There's a counter thought to it. I mean, I pay attention to the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we purposely target a 4-to-1 ratio for the brain. But there's a couple of shows I've done on the dangers of fish oil talking about some of those issues. But I don't want to get sidetracked on that right now, but I do want to say this. What about some of the other things? Like there's a product I'm experimenting with. It's the lion's mane mushroom. And then there's one that's sulforaphanes that we're running some tests on. Both of those are nootropics, if you will. I mean, it has a dramatic effect on the brain. There's some other ones that you love.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought those up because, yeah, I just love nutrition and supplements because I think food as medicine is not only powerful but also very yummy, right? So yeah, lion's mane has been shown to activate nerve growth factors in BDNF, and then the sulforaphanes. There's actually studies for that. It was an animal study, but still it can translate into human studies. Where after there was a head injury, by taking sulforaphane, it actually helped rebuild the blood-brain barrier. So other polyphenols, very important, like curcumin found in turmeric, like the curry spice. So you can get it through food. You can also get it through high-quality supplements. What happens very briefly in a head injury, it's an answer to a question you had earlier, like what happens in a head injury? Well, not only is there a physical trauma, but there's also a chemical trauma, that immunoexcitotoxicity. And so toxins are released in the brain that your own brain cells holds them, but if they're released in too high amounts, we call them excitotoxicity. It's glutamate.
Glutamate
pathway. We can do to help calm down an excitotoxic brain. And people watching out there, they're like, what does that mean? So yeah, if you have light or sound sensitivity or you get irritable after your head injury, most likely you might have excitotoxicity happening in your brain, right? And so one thing you can do to help calm that down is taking magnesium. It's one of the master minerals, especially what we call magnesium threonate, which allows the magnesium.
What we use,
yeah, perfect. Yeah, we're totally on the same page. I love it. And so those are really important things. You can get magnesium from a lot of leafy green vegetables, but if your brain is immunotoxic, you want to do that in conjunction with taking magnesium threonate.
That's what we do, yeah, because it crosses the blood-brain barrier. I know GABA has and taurine have a play on that pathway as well.
Absolutely, yeah. GABA helps to calm down any overactivity of brain cells, which, it's kind of paradoxical, right? You think like, oh, if your brain is injured, it should start shutting down. It doesn't. It actually first becomes overactive, and that's why you have the light, sound sensitivity, and the irritability. So you want to do things to help calm it down, just like you're saying. Yeah, GABA can work really well. Anything that helps support the GABAergic pathways, magnesium threonate, and things that lower inflammation like DHA, fish oils, and yeah, again, making sure that the omega-3 to 6 ratio is in good balance, as well as looking at EPA versus DHA. That's where, Dr. Dan, it's really about also personalization, right?
So do you know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you know anything about NMDA receptors, N-methyl D-aspartate, because there are abundance in the spinal cord, as you mentioned, right, the upper spine, in the brainstem, I should say, and they fire that pathway, and there's basically a negative feedback loop that drives inflammation continually unless you downregulate it. What do you know about that pathway?
Yeah, NMDA, that's so important. It's because it's kind of like when in health, it's crucial for neuroplasticity, because what ends up happening, neuroplasticity is this a beautiful, amazing ability for our brains to change structure. And when you change the structure, you change the function. When you change the function of the brain, you change your experience of the world, right? And we can do that through our different experiences. So in order for neuroplasticity to actually happen at the cellular level, though, the nerve signal our experience. So for example, remember when I was talking about like lowering the level of light or sound coming in, that's going to help deactivate the NMDA receptor in the mesencephalon. Because like you said, if a person is already overactive and there's too much feedback, you need to calm that down, right? But on the flip side of that, if a person has their prefrontal lobe isn't working very well and they have attention issues, they have ADD, or they feel distracted, their brain fog, you want to actually activate the NMDA receptors. Because what ends up happening when you do the satanama, guess what? You're firing a very powerful pathway from your nerve receptors in your fingers, runs up your spinal cord, synapses or makes it a stop in your cerebellum, then crosses over into your right prefrontal lobe. So when you do your left finger movements, you activate NMD receptors in your right prefrontal cortex. And if the stimulus is strong enough, the NMDA receptor, this is where magnesium comes in. Normally, the NMDA receptor is blocked by magnesium. If you activate it powerfully enough, by doing the sata nama with focused attention, you remove the magnesium block, and then you allow calcium to come in, which leads to neuroplasticity. I can geek out into all the cellular mechanisms, but so that's the thing. It's about finding that balance. For some people, and I said this earlier, if their prefrontal lobe is not strong enough, you need to do things to activate the NMDA receptor, right? But if, so for example, if they have problems of focus, attention, you want to do things to actually exercise the frontal lobe.
All right.
On the flip side, if someone's had a concussion or they're neurotoxic and they have light and sound sensitivity, those NMDA receptors are already overactive because the magnesium is released. So guess what we use? Magnesium threonate to plug that, calm that down, put on the sunglasses, put in the earplug. That calms things down. And while we're driving the frontal lobe pathway, there's actually a very specific pathway that connects the frontal lobe with the mesencephalon, the brainstem. When we create and strengthen the frontal lobe, that calms down the fight or flight response in the mesencephalon. So all this has to work together in conjunction, just like what you said, just what I lay out in my 6-week plan. We have to do things to activate the brain. Yes. By activating NMDA receptors. We have to do things to rest the brain by calming down NMDA receptors. We have to do things to remove toxins by plugging up the NMDA receptors and magnesium, right? We have to do things to lower inflammation, things like fish oil, DHA, and other, clean sources. And then finally, the fifth thing that we can do, in addition, just like you said, is really removing the toxins. And in my book, one of the chapters actually, it's called in the 6-week plan is week 5 is take out the trash. I think you'll like that one, where we remove toxins, not only when we mobilize toxins, we actually, just like, we need to sweat them out. We need to poop them out. So we need to make sure that like all the routes for toxins to get out of the body are optimized. So gut health is optimized, and using sweat. So in our practice, we use an infrared sauna. If people don't have that at home, they can go to their local gym, sit in the sauna and sweat. But if you haven't done this before and you've had a head injury, I don't recommend doing it for more than 5 minutes at a time.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. You know how that is. And if you don't have access to the sauna, even doing something as simple as taking like the Epsom salt bath, right? That helps you.
I recommend all these things.
We're totally on the same page. I love it. So those are like the top 5 things I can recommend for people out there. And again, like I said before, the key is personalization. What might work for one person might not work for another. Yeah. Or it might work, but maybe not at the same dosage. Maybe you need a lot more fish oils. Maybe you need to spend less time doing mini breaks and more time sweating, things like that. So the key is personalization. That's why I'm really excited about the book, because in the book there are quizzes that help people get to the root cause of why they're struggling with their head injuries, and figure out what are the specific regions of the brain that might need more activation, might need more rest. And in addition, at the end of the book is the 6-week plan with exercises to target those areas, as well as things to do to help lower inflammation, help to clear out toxicity. And programs like yours as well go into deep depth with detoxification, which is so important.
Yeah, I mean, we start out, we have a preparatory phase, then we have a body phase, then we build them to the brain phase. And that's where we're using things.
Yeah, exactly. You got to do it in the right order.
Right. Cytodetox, actually, some of the particles cross the blood-brain barrier. Some do not purposely. And then we also match it with alpha-lipoic acid in the brain phase. And because we want to bring in fat-soluble chelators to actually move the stuff out of the brain. And then we prepare the downstream. We grab it in the gut so you don't reabsorb. Admittedly, I haven't read the book yet, but you better send it to me because I really want to read it. I read your stuff, obviously, but I haven't read the book, and I can't wait, because I think that I would get a lot of really amazing ideas on things that we need to be doing, to really help with the neuroplasty, along this, because putting the detox together with this, I think there's a lot of magic here. I have a question for you.
All kinds right?
Yeah. But this question, it's maybe off topic, but I can't wait to hear your response. How do you think that EMF plays into this? Because EMF, we know, has an effect on the NMDA receptors, calcium channels, and what it's doing. This is another form of toxin today that's, at least the levels that we're exposed to is new to humans. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, at the end of the day, we're all energy, right? Even when we talk about all these physical receptors, it's because they're vibrating, It's not so much like this physical plug happening, it's the vibration and interactions. And so EMFs can be really, really a huge obstacle to people healing from brain injuries. And it's the interesting thing is, I think EMFs, they have really subtle yet powerful impacts on human physiology. What I see almost all the time is, after a head injury, a lot of people become a lot more sensitive to the EMFs. So
that's basically why I asked, and I was going to make that comment, that clinically that's what I see. So
yeah.
what's going on there?
So a lot of it, again, it goes back to what's actually happening at the NMDA receptor. So, and I mean, if I had a whiteboard, I used to teach neurology, like I said before, there's what's known as this action potential that happens where a neuron, before it becomes excited, has to cross a certain threshold.
Right.
Normally, like, our brain cells shouldn't be so reactive. They should be like a chill kind of, like, we have a Rhodesian Ridgeback. She's a very sweet and calm dog, right? She doesn't really react to much unless there's like a danger or something, right? So imagine, like, normally when our brain cells and our NMDA receptors are healthy, it's like a nice, cool, relaxed dog that only responds when it needs to, right? Whereas after a head injury, the cells sit a lot closer to threshold, meaning the Rhodesian Ridgeback becomes more like a Chihuahua with an AK-47. Right? So any little stimuli, whether it's light, sound, which is a form of energy, just like EMFs are. And so a lot of patients after a concussion, because their neurons are sitting what we call a lot closer to threshold, meaning any little stimulus will trigger them, right? Have you seen like at the carnivals, or in the past they used to have these games called the Strongman?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, where you hit the bell, and if you hit the thing strong enough, it rings the bell. So normally it's like when you hit that bell, only if it's really strong and it really should bring our attention, like if it's some danger thing or something that really is exciting to us, we bring our attention to, our brain gets activated, right? Well, what ends up happening is that bell then, rather than being all the way down here, it sits here. So if you breathe on the trigger, it rings the bell, and over and over and over, people get exhausted. And so again, it really boils down to, it's just energy, whether that could be light, that could be sound, that could be these EMFs. And so I think one of the solutions is, yeah, absolutely, we need to, because who knows what it's doing in the long run to, like, our physiology, right? This is a massive science experiment, which is a bit frightening. But what we can do to protect ourselves is everything that you talk about through cellular detoxification, everything that I'm talking about through brain exercise, right? Because when we do that, we then bring ourselves
threshold
away from threshold. If we want to talk about it at the cellular level, we bring those NMDA receptors further from threshold, by plugging the magnesium, by lowering inflammation, and through exercise, so we become more resilient. So absolutely, I think, especially for people who have had head injuries, you want to avoid EMFs as much as possible, which is pretty hard these days. But so what you can do is what I do, because I've had head injuries and I'm somewhat sensitive to this stuff. Like, I always turn my phone off if I'm not using it, right? And I keep it far away from my brain, far away from my family jewels, the most important organs, my heart. And then if I do use it, I'll use a speakerphone.
I always do.
Yeah, exactly. And the way I look at it, it's just kind of like a necessary evil these days. But then what I do is I try to spend as much time as I can in nature, lying in a patch of grass, because that helps to lower the threshold of
But and that's what I found. It is all about the threshold because it's all about adaptation, isn't it?
yeah,
Meaning the body will do what it can to survive. If it's near that threshold, you're going to be reactive to everything because it's trying to survive. But if we
exactly.
can lower the threshold, physical, chemical, emotional, electromagnetic,
Yeah,
lower the threshold. And we have to hit all of it to lower that threshold.
exactly.
You're not as reactive, number one. But number two, then, once you get near that threshold, I always say you're creating more damage. Your bucket's overflowing,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
you're driving inflammation. Yeah. So we have to empty the stress bucket, the
Yeah.
threshold bucket.
Exactly.
And really paying attention to all of these things is the
They're
key.
all so important. Yeah, exactly, because it all adds up. And what I shared with you guys earlier with the brain save mini break, that's one way of lowering that mental threshold.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, you're lowering the threshold, right? Yeah.
It clears that, and especially if you take a mini break, and then what I try to do is we try to, because we live really close to this gorgeous regional park, Tilden Park, we try to get out there at least once a week and go for a hike where we don't have any goals in mind. We're just meandering. We're just soaking up nature and just clearing all the excessive, energetic gunk that's collected over the week.
Yeah.
And yeah, and people who don't have that luxury where they live really close to a national park, they can just start filling their homes with plants, right? Aloe vera has been shown to actually increase oxygenation at night. So get an aloe vera plant, put it in your bedroom, and you help to bring oxygenation to your brain and help to clear out a lot of that gunk that you're talking about.
Yeah. Wow. I'm sure you have a zillion more little tips in your book. Where do you get the book? What's your website, and how
Yeah.
do they find you?
Yeah, great. So my book is called Brain Save, the
Mhm.
6-week plan to heal your brain from concussions, brain injuries, and head traumas without drugs or surgery.
Yeah.
And viewers out there, they can actually just go on Amazon, and the paperback was just released. Oh my God, I'm so happy. It's just a whole other thing. Like in April, the digital copy released, right? And that was exciting. But when I actually got the physical proof, it was like, oh man, it's a whole other thing. And so, yeah, I encourage you guys share in this joy with me. Get a physical copy and just feel it and share it with people who you think would benefit from it. Even if you've never had a head injury, I'm sure you know someone out there who's been in a car accident or even been on a roller coaster, gotten shaken up a bit, and aren't the same after that. This book can change their life. So they can get that on Amazon, and they can learn more about me and my unique approach to root cause neurology on my website, www.drtituschew.com.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Chiu. Wow. Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, like I said, this is a show people are going to want to share because there's so many people, 1.1 billion suffering,
Oh my God,
and
yeah.
related to mental disease. I mean, honestly, and that's what you have to understand.
Yeah.
There's a
I'd
lot
love
of
to have another conversation with you in the future. This has been such a pleasure where we can dive into that, the link between, because you kind of asked me earlier, and I again didn't get a chance to answer that, the link between head injuries and psychological symptoms. And I
Yeah,
can,
no, I almost brought you back there, but for the sake of time, let me make you a promise. I'm going to read the book, and I'm going to have you back on the show. How's that?
beautiful. I would be honored. Yeah. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for inviting me.
Sometimes it's almost good because if I would have read it, I jump into details because I remember practically everything I read, right? So
That's
I'm
awesome.
into the nuances, and invariably I ask everything that I'm interested in, and when I kind of go in a little more naked, I ask what the viewers would ask. I hope so. It's good. So part two,
Thank you
I'm
so much.
going to ask the in-depth questions, and I'm going to be really down into it. This is an important subject, so it's definitely the brain. Period is a fascination of mine. So thank you for being on, Dr. Chiu. I appreciate you, and we're going to have you on again.
You're welcome. I appreciate you too. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of CHTV. We'll be back next week and every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern. You may also subscribe to us on iTunes or find us at podcast.drpompa.com. Thanks for listening.